So we should probably talk about this new Nintendo patent. Right as I was in the middle of working on a video that was gathering up some of the more recent rumors for Nintendo's next hardware that I find to be a little more credible, we have a very interesting bit of new news in the form of a patent that Nintendo has filed. Now, I first heard of this patent through Video Game Chronicle, who they cited Game Rant as being the first people they know of who discovered and talked about the patent. And patents are a very interesting thing when it comes to looking at what a company might be working on, because unlike a rumor or hearsay, it is 100% verifiable fact. This is something that Nintendo has filed. There is no way of defeating that. However, just because it is a patent that Nintendo has filed doesn't mean that it's something that they are going to 100% be delivering anytime soon, nor does it mean that the hardware in question is actually related to the next bit of hardware we're expecting that people are hoping is a successor to the Switch. Real quick, I just want to shout out, obviously this is not the last time I'm going to be talking about stuff like this. We're always going to be seeing different, major rumors or concepts coming out about what Nintendo could be working on next. They might even just officially announce the thing sometime in the next year. So whenever I find that kind of stuff interesting to cover, I will be making videos. If you don't want to miss out on that stuff, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're properly notified. So before I go all in on talking about just, the likelihood of whether or not this is actually their next hardware, or even just what I think about the idea in general, let's take a look at what the patent is showing. It is effectively a concept that is actually closer to their DS line of systems than the Nintendo Switch, where it is a clamshell foldable device featuring a pair of screens for the UI, along with all the buttons and sticks for playing it, but with a couple of additional very important changes. First of which, there is a third screen located on the outside clamshell of the system, so along with having two screens while it's open, there's another screen that displays even when the device is closed. And even more interestingly, the device has the ability to separate into two separate pieces that can be played at the same time. This is almost like the idea of Switch Joy-Cons, but on steroids, where instead of being able to take away two controllers that turn into a pair of smaller controllers, instead you have a device that can split into two separate gaming devices. Which also lines up with another patent, actually, that people looked at a couple weeks back for Nintendo, where it was something that was like a simplified handheld device where it had a screen built in and built-in controls, but the controls were a simple single stick and a single ABXY input, along the lines of what you would have on a single Joy-Con, rather than the full spread of buttons that, a dedicated handheld would traditionally have. Whether or not this is the next Switch system or is something that Nintendo is, possibly debating working on in the future, I will say that personally, I really hope this is a thing that ends up becoming a reality for a number of different reasons. One, I love when Nintendo decides to be weird. Sometimes it really doesn't work out for them, and other times it works out beautifully. But that is one of the things about them that to me is a signature aspect of their hardware. They're not interested in necessarily making a straightforward, simple device. It's about getting a little weird with things and opening up experiences that you can't necessarily get on any other hardware. And even more importantly, and tied into this, is how much a device like this could be a follow-up to the DS line of systems. As much as I love the Nintendo Switch, and in my mind at this point, the Switch has solidified itself as basically being the biggest handheld Nintendo has done, biggest console in general, really, there is something about the DS and 3DS line of systems that has been lost as a result of shifting away from that design. The dual screen setup, while some games certainly didn't fully require them, some made use of them in extremely interesting and unique ways that can't really be recaptured on current hardware. This was one of my biggest concerns when Nintendo was announcing they were closing the eShop for the 3DS, because there were so many games that can't necessarily be made again on other platforms. They could be ported eventually, but a core part of the experience is lost. One of the main examples of this that I cite really often is The World Ends With You. Not something that got delisted from the eShop, but it is a game that is extremely unique to the DS interface, and while it has been ported to other systems later, lost a good bit of the shine that really made it a unique game. The battle system just isn't the same. And so the idea that Nintendo is potentially working on a device that brings back the dual, or in this case, triple screen setup that could allow you to bring back more of those DS-style experiences, whether it's with having games listed digitally once again on a new storefront for this device, or even porting, remaking some games from those past ones, introducing new games that leverage those kind of gameplay mechanics, is something that I am very, very into. Especially if the idea was to have a device like this and the Switch or a Switch successor exist side by side. We're able to keep alive multiple multiple different types of libraries across these two devices, that is something that I would love. Now, the question here, of course, is that with this just simply being a patent, is this the next thing that Nintendo is releasing? Is it an unrelated additional piece of hardware that's planned for further down the line? Or is this one of those patents that is simply filed and ends up going nowhere? Obviously, there's no way of actually knowing this for a fact right now. This is purely speculation on my and everyone else's parts who are looking at this. Personally, while I do lean towards the idea of I think this could be something else unrelated or further down the line, I kind of feel like this could maybe be the form the next system takes. One of the main reasons I say this is that I go back to one of the things I've said repeatedly when it comes to speculation and rumor about Nintendo's next piece of hardware. There is no guarantee that it's going to be something as simple as a Switch 2. Switch 2 isn't even a thing that Nintendo themselves have ever said. They don't talk about systems in terms of it being, the next Switch that they're working on. They've only talked about new hardware that's in the works. Switch 2 is just the assumption and simplified name that a lot of people want to give it because the hope and dream is, well, I like the Switch as it is, I would really just like a new device that does the same stuff, but is even beefier, more powerful, and can support more demanding games. And while I 100% understand that desire, and it's one that I personally share as well, at the same time, Nintendo isn't necessarily known for playing things safe like that. There is a certain logic you can use looking at their past handhelds in particular where systems do come out kind of in pairs. The Game Boy Color, and GBA line were all just increasing power while keeping the same concept of being a handheld. The DS changed that up being a dual screen setup and then was built upon further with the 3DS adding the 3D element but keeping that same general design still. And so if you think of the Switch as being the beginning of another handheld generation, it does make a certain sense to think that the next thing, if it were to follow the same pattern, would be something very much similar to the Switch, being something that could dock and play handheld as well. By that same token, though, one of the weird things about the Switch, right, is that it kind of follows lines with both their handhelds and their home consoles. And when you look at their home consoles, yeah, they've had systems that kind of relate to each other, but there's been a little bit more room for experimentation, especially with the last set of the Wii and the Wii U. The Wii U shares the Wii's name and even maintained having backwards compatibility with those games, and still offered Wiimote support with motion control focus on games, but also had its own completely original new idea with the game tablet that paired with the system and opened up all kinds of new experiences that the Wii was not capable of. And that's entirely something that could also happen here, where maybe this is something that could be backwards compatible with the Switch, does support Switch experiences and games. After all, the vast majority of them simply needed to be a gaming device of some sort. Outside of the occasional motion control focus, there's not a whole lot of super unique things to how the Switch plays games that it couldn't work on a later, more different piece of hardware. But the one aspect of this thing's design that raises a question about that is, would the docked and handheld separate support still exist? And at first glance, when you look at the idea of something that is a clamshell design portable system, it doesn't feel quite as right. But the more I think about it, the more I'm actually curious about the potential here. Because you have something where it's a dual screen setup while it's opened up, and it has that outer screen that could have additional functions and uses as well. And so it makes me wonder if there was some method for this device to connect to your TV that doesn't require a dock like the Switch does, where you drop it in and it stays stationary there, but instead is almost something like the Wii U experience, where you're holding the system still and connecting to a local display, and that outer screen is being used in those situations to still bring a dual screen setup. It'd be this bizarre fusion of what the Wii U did in an interesting way, but then also combining that with the Switch's functionality into a whole new system that does kind of both in its own very different way. And again, something like this would be a pretty dramatic shift in design, more than I think a lot of people are expecting, which, Nintendo, again, I don't think fully cares. They like to throw people curveballs. They like to focus more on innovation than playing it safe. But if they were more in the mood to play things safe, then it would make sense for this to be some kind of auxiliary, secondary, down the line additional device with a more traditional Switch successor coming out next. After all, for the longest time, Nintendo supported having two lines of hardware at the same time, and the Switch was when they stopped doing that because it effectively merged those two lines together, though they kept the 3DS around for a little while still after. And so potentially, maybe there's a more traditional Switch successor that is still the mainline home console with portable functionality, and this triple screen thing could be a new handheld focused line that exists alongside it, and maybe acts as a little bit of a way of bringing the DS style of handheld back to life. There is, of course, also the third very real possibility of this just goes nowhere. That's the thing with patents, right? Companies file patents for all kinds of things they're actively working on or thinking about, and just because you see a patent being filed doesn't guarantee that that's a thing that's actually being actively worked on or is ever going to come to reality. Looking back at the original Switch launch is a great example of this, right? Where looking at patents was a very popular way that people were trying to get ideas of what the next system could be. I myself did my fair share of videos looking at them, and one particular patent that did get a lot of circulation was the concept of a system that had a docked and handheld gameplay, which is exactly the form the Switch took. Ended up being that patent was exactly what the next bit of hardware was being. At the same time, another patent that a lot of people were looking at was one that featured a full screen display with a couple of sticks over the interface. And that obviously, at least as of right now, has not happened. So that is the thing to keep in mind with patents, you know? They are more substantial and verifiable than something like a rumor or hearsay, but at the same time, isn't exactly an official announcement. Either way, whether this ends up being real or not, I'm personally very intrigued by this particular patent, especially being as big of a fan of the DS and 3DS as I am. I would love to see a new system kind of carry that torch forward, because again, I love the Switch, absolutely. But there is something that was lost from that style of handheld that I would love to see come back, and this looks like the kind of device that could do that. So that's just my 2 cents on this recent patent. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know. I am planning on covering more rumors and stuff like this as time goes on, and if we ever see an official announcement come up from Nintendo, obviously I'm going to focus a lot on that. Eventually, whenever this thing comes out, I'll cover it as in-depth as I can. So if you want to make sure you see that content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.